If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you and make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired of waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good or speak too wise. If you can dream, not make dream your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors both the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, and see the thing you gave your life for broken, and stoop and build it up again with worn out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss and lose, and start again at your beginning, and never breathe one word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve their turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will that says to man, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son, my son, my son.
What we started at 4 o'clock this morning. The position now in Northern Ireland is that anyone can go anywhere.
Something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look.
Whole communities were our enemy. They hated us. They hated us with a vengeance, and that became very, very apparent very, very quickly. I wasn't prepared for that level of hatred.
The 16-year-old me was joining the army to get the best training possible and come back here and take the fight to the IRA.
There was just a feeling that this was going to be in for the long haul. This wasn't going to go away overnight.
People say, oh, you were in a war. To me, it was no war. If somebody comes up and shoots you in the back of the head, how can that be a war? To me, that's cold-blooded murder.
In the street, singing songs and a carry inside.
The expectation that something could happen every minute that really, really wore on your nerves and wore you down.
It's time to stop.
It's like, you know, we're here to do our job, we're here to look after each other. The IRA are our enemy. If we can get out of this alive, then that's the big Brucey bonus thing.
I mean, quite clearly, the grand strategic objective was to keep Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom.
Everybody look what's going, you better stop now.
fighting went on, and so did the shooting. Although it didn't reach the pitch of the previous night, it was still critical, with opposing groups still facing each other across the barricades. The total of dead in Ulster went up to 6, and it was becoming all too clear that the RUC was too tired and too weak in numbers to keep control of the situation. It was time to call in the troops.
Soldiers then! Thank God, thank God that you soldiers.
The honeymoon period cannot, I do not think, continue forever, obviously, unless there is a solution or some hope for the future. And this is where the politicians have got to come in. The soldiers are not going to be welcomed on the streets for forever and ever.
I think when you were born in 1960, the Second World War was still very fresh in a lot of people's minds. So we had a lot of war films, and there's a lot of glamour attached, Hollywood style, to being a soldier. I had my Action Man doll, I had your Johnny 7 machine gun. And so I think it was kind of drummed into you from the earliest age that to be a soldier was to be something.
I was kind of groomed at school to either go into a factory at Coventry or to go down the pit. I was lucky enough to gain an apprenticeship as a gas fitter, kind of finished that for 4 years, left school at 15. And then I had this kind of thing that I didn't really want to be fitting gas cookers for the rest of my life. And there was this urge, like many young lads at that time, where travel wasn't easy as it is today, to kind of get out of that pit culture and maybe see a bit of the world. I was in this play of joining the military to kind of see the world, but not really buying into it from the point of view of Queen and country.
Well, originally my father was from London, and when I was 5 years old, we went over to London to see his family, and I went to see the changing of the guard. And 5 years old, I said, right, that's what I want to do. I want to join the army. My father ran a youth club, and in those days, soldiers in Paris went around youth clubs, taking with them trampolines and sometimes their weapons for, let the youngsters have a look at. And that's what I decided, right, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a para, and that's what I ended up being. And I'm very pleased that I did.
I'm come from a military family. My mum was in the army, my father was in the army. So, of course, I went in the army. But that's it. It's, it's a job, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's a job. Lads I went to school with, they decided to go in the army, and then, they came home on leave and they had a few quid in the pocket, and, they were telling these fantastic stories of having good times with a gang of lads, basically. And I thought, well, that's a bit of me, that is. They're coming home on leave, we were going out, and of course they were telling me stories. One was in the Remy, one was in the infantry. And I thought, oh, I fancy a bit of that. And then my mother said to me, she said, you wouldn't last 5 minutes in the army. And I went, I'll show you, Mother. Yeah. And that's it, I did. I went in.
The reason I joined the army, I had two things I wanted to do in life. That was go to art school or join the army. Two sides of the coin, if you like. My father did national service, and he'd always go on about saying that was, the best years of his life. He always had a job to go to. He had respect because he did his bit for the country, and I guess I kind of aspired to that, and I wanted to have that respect, if you like, and I decided to join up, do my bit, and yeah, join the parachute regiment. My stepfather actually said to me, he said, why are you joining the paras? It's too hard for you. So as soon as he said that, I was determined to prove him wrong.
I have 3 older sisters, and they were all working in Desmond's factory. And I thought, no way am I going to work in a factory. I wanted always to be an RUC woman, and I applied, I'd done the interview, but there were so many people joining at that stage, there was no vacancy. So then I joined the UDR, and I stayed in the UDR.
Just stay there, please.
I was naive. I mean, I was 16 years of age. I had grown up in what I can only describe as a conflict zone. I thought that by joining the army I would be able to come back here and literally wage combat against the IRA and for want of a description, take revenge for what had been occurring within my community. At 16 I could have joined the UVF and instead I was guided by family members and family friends to join the British Army.
You get your sort of your Glasgow sectarianism, so I was very aware. I was brought up a Protestant. I used to go and watch the Rangers, so I knew all the songs, you know. My knowledge of the Troubles was, we were told it was just a few nutters that were conducting all the shootings and the killings, but obviously we only got a very one-sided view. So we got this idea that it was only a handful of nutters that were involved in the IRA, and it was British territory. What was all, I didn't really fully comprehend the whole thing, but I knew what was going on.
I was young and it was a job and I'm going to Northern Ireland. I didn't know much about it political-wise, but all I knew, I'm going there, yeah, I might not come home. But I knew you go in the army, there's a very good chance you're going to end up in Northern Ireland, yeah.
The terrorist is a highly motivated individual and is dedicated to the cause of liberation of the nationalist population. He is a master at remaining anonymous.
We get a thing called NUT training, the Northern Ireland training, where it's a makeshift village, if you want, where you patrol and things blow up and people appear and you try not to shoot Mrs. Murphy that's out sweeping her path and stuff like that. So a quite general basic to make you aware of what we were going to be up against.
I think we used to call it Tin City. There were buildings of facades, but they weren't real buildings, so it gave you the impression that you was in an urban area. And you weren't allowed out on the streets until you'd done this training, which I think, if I remember right, was about 2 weeks long, something like
that. You go through Northern Ireland scenarios of what could possibly happen when you're in Northern Ireland, and it's just like a town, just post box shops, but obviously they weren't open shops, but it was very similar, just to like an urban area.
Another regiment would be brought in to provide the civilian population, or Civ Pop as they were called. It could get very eventful sometimes because each regiment in the British Army is in rivalry with another one. So one regiment getting the opportunity to commit a little bit of assault on another regiment, either from the soldier to civilian or civilian to soldier point of view, was seen as quite a bit of fun for some of the lads, particularly the civilian population, or the soldiers playing the civilian population.
Yeah, it was a bit of fun. It was a bit of fun, yeah, because it was very realistic. Obviously, there was no live rounds used, but there was splats they used to have. They used to position them in doorways, and then, of course, you come under contact, you dive into that doorway, and then these splats would go off, and it's like rounds ricocheting off the brickwork.
Stand by! It was basically a purpose-built town, and you would patrol through it, bins would blow up, there'd be shootings from windows, and you'd be practicing your reactions to it. There'd be riot situations. It was like Northern Ireland to the max.
We only got 1 week's training. When you think like the British soldiers would go in and they would be trained for everything, we're not. Because they thought everybody was a terrorist. You know, around a corner and anybody there was a terrorist. You know, because I actually went over and took part in some of their training in England. And really, it was really over the top, really. It wasn't as never as bad here, or so I thought, than they were getting trained on.
You have this pre-parachute selection thing called P Company, and I did that 3 times. People thought I was some lunatic because it was a very difficult week of physical torture. But for me, I couldn't go back home and say, you know, I couldn't hack it. You know, I was determined to get through, and my first posting, you know, we were all told, you know, what battalions we're going to go to, and I was going to Free Para. and to Northern Ireland, and I was only 17.
Most of the men came by ship, docking in Belfast after crossing overnight from Liverpool. 400 of them, drawn from the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, arrived a few hours after a similar shipload of men of the Grenadier Guard.
We had flown from Chester, which was where our base was, and the first thing that struck me was the speed of transition. That 1 minute, on the Sunday I'm watching, I think it was the final football match of the season, and then 6 o'clock the next day, we're driven to Liverpool, and from Liverpool, we're flown by RAF Hercules to Aldergrove, stepped off that plane straight onto a Chinook that flew us, I think it was Omagh, or St Angelo, where we swapped into Pumas to eventually be dropped at, for me it was the Killyvilly checkpoint on the border not far from Rosslea. So the speed of transition from sitting in my local watching a football match to being in a place where I could conceivably be harmed or do harm was extremely quick.
My first ever flight from Heathrow to Aldergrove at the time, I remember thinking, what are you doing? Hundreds of soldiers had been killed, you know, but I just went with it. You just had to go with it.
I went over on the Liverpool-Belfast ferry with 6 young officers and 40 recruits just out of basic training. We were met at the docks by an officer in my regiment who said, I've got 3 hours to hand over the platoon to you. I'm taking over as the battalion ops officer because he was shot last night. So I found myself very quickly with no pre-deployment training in charge. The most exciting, difficult and dangerous 4 months of my life then followed.
Whole communities were our enemy. They hated us. They hated us with a vengeance, and that became very, very apparent very, very quickly. I wasn't prepared for that level of hatred, and my defence mechanism to that was to hate them as much as they hated me, and to dehumanise them as they had dehumanised me. Getting spat at and get dogs setting on you, kids throwing bricks at you, and they were accurate little fuckers. If they'd got me, they would have been rejoicing. And that's something that really stuck in my throat. I just did not want them to be happy about me getting got, if that makes sense.
Evening. I wonder if I could ask you a few questions, please.
Certainly the people that we were operating around with in South Armagh and the Crossblain area had no regard for us whatsoever. I mean, we were spat upon, sworn at. There was no question, really, of any kind of relationship with them. Yes, of course, we would stop and check people from time to time, but it always involved a lot of effing and blinding and really actually not almost impossible to establish any kind of relations.
Of course, we were verbally abused, we were spat at on a daily basis. Yeah, but you had to bite your lip. It's not me they hated, it was the uniform. And they told me that on several occasions. But of course, every now and again, they did trip somebody's switch, and that was it. Yeah, they retaliated. It did happen.
I was in this Land Rover, and we could stand up through the hatch in the top, so there was kind of 2 or 3 guys, and I'm sort of pointing this rifle around, feeling quite powerful, I suppose, as a young lad. I got this rifle in my hand, I'm keeping law and order. The Land Rover came to a halt, it hit the quick release, and my magazine shot across and landed on the floor. The spring bust open, and there was kind of 20-odd rounds over the floor. And within seconds, kids and everything were just there trying to pick this ammo up. You know, you can't let this happen. So the guys bomb-bursted out of this Land Rover to try and kind of recover these rounds. I felt all right, you know, Wally. But in that action, I remember getting back into the Land Rover when we recovered these things and absolutely being covered from top to bottom in phlegm. Everybody had come and kind of spat on me. And I remember thinking, they don't like me.
The way that we operated was really a reflection of our training and our focus, and being very conscious of the threat. There was a long-range sniping threat. There was an ever-present IED threat, which meant that our planning of routes, our patrolling, our mutual support, one part of the patrol supporting another, so there was always someone on the ground surveilling hilltops or other places where a threat could come from. And soldiers rise to that kind of professional challenge. You know, we knew what we had to do. We knew the atmosphere was pretty dire around us, but we were determined that the rule of law, British law, was going to still extend, because the strategic objective was that Northern Ireland would remain a part of the United Kingdom.
Essentially, we were there to deter the terrorist. We were there to prevent him moving easily. Our threat came from across the border. It didn't come internally. We had no internal IRA men, if you like. They came from across the border. Now they would have had their informers and their eyes and their ears in our area, but the gunman or the bomber, he came from Donegal or the surrounding counties.
The attack happened at 4:20 at the Derryard checkpoint, about 2 miles from the Fermanagh-Monaghan border. The police say
there was a bomb that went off at one of the police stations. There was another bomb that went off in one of the towns that my regiment was responsible for. There was a machine gun attack on the checkpoint at Killyvilly. So there was instances happening. But I have to say that it's what didn't happen that would play on your mind more, because even though you would have, relative to a 6-month tour, there'd be relatively few incidents. They weren't happening on an hourly basis. They didn't actually happen for it to play on your mind, because you knew that the next step you take could be onto a pressure pad device that will blow up, or the next step you take could be there could be a sniper who's got a bead on you, or so it was the expectation that something could happen every minute that really, really wore on your nerves and wore you down eventually.
Most of the tours that I'd done were room and battalion tours, which is for 6 months. And during that 6 months, your daily life is 8 hours patrolling, 8 hours QRF, 8 hours rest. When you're not out in patrol, you're in your Aniba vest, or you're sitting ready to be deployed in the event of an action. And then during your 8 hours rest, it's about getting your kit sorted, getting some sleep, or whatever it may be. Obviously, there would be days where maybe there was an operation on, but generally your day-to-day mundane activity as an infantry soldier deployed in a Roman battalion was 8 hours on, 8 hours QRF, 8 hours off, day in, day out for the 6 months.
Improvised explosive devices were probably our biggest challenge. On one occasion, a milk churn by a crossroads at somewhere called Courtrees-le Bridge between Crossmaglen and Fork Hill had been identified, and people were concerned that this might well have been an IED. My company commander, Major Peter Willis, planned a deliberate operation to go and clear this device. All our movement was by helicopter. We flew in and out of cordon on the basis that the vehicle was too dangerous. 5 of us moved forward to a spot where we could observe and show them where the milk churn was. As we were going forward, Peter Willis, my company commander, stopped me, gave me a photograph and said, don't bother to come any further, orientate yourself to the ground for a lie-up operation I want you to do here this weekend. So I stopped. They went about another 30 yards, and 30 seconds, a minute later, tremendous explosion, and the 4 of them were standing on 70 pounds of commercial explosive, and all 4 were killed completely. One reflects on, if Peter hadn't stopped and given me the air photograph, it would have been 5 killed. That does make you ponder about life a little bit.
The soldiers, dead and alive, have been lying over there ever since the bomb went off at 10 to 10 this morning. An army doctor flown in by helicopter was able to confirm that 2 were dead and 1 injured. But because of the great danger of further booby traps, he was unable to get to another 2 men. However, it's pretty certain that they too are dead, bringing the final toll to 4.
Well, a lot of it was patrolling, so maybe like patrolling, housing estates which were very similar to the ones back home. It would just be loads of patrols, come back, go to the NAFI, smoke cigarettes, drink coffee, and and if we were on night duty, we'd do a night patrols, come back, make an egg banjo, a fried egg sandwich, and it was just that all the time. It was just constant patrolling, going out, and in between them patrols, you'd come back and go to the NAFI and watch MTV, or you could go into the video room where people would be watching Pickle Bill's porn collection.
Plenty of patrols, vehicle patrols, river patrols up and down the Foyle and Rigid Raiders, but the majority of it was in the city, foot patrols, vehicle patrols, that was the majority of it, and then back to the barracks and twiddle your thumbs till next patrol. Well, I got the camera from the NAFI. That came about after I got a NAFI card, which is like a credit card to use in the NAFI. And I thought, oh, what can I get with this? And I saw the video camera and I thought, oh, I'll get a video camera, because I've always been like making films and things like that. And I'm glad I did now. So basically I spanked my NAFI card, as it was referred to. That means maxing it out. I used to sneak it out on vehicle patrols. I never took it out on foot patrols because, of course, I had nowhere to put it, but in vehicle patrols you could, and I thought I'd get a bit of footage of my time in Londonderry. The senior ranks didn't know about it. Of course they didn't, because if they knew, they wouldn't let me do it. I'd have had my camera, let's say, seized, till we got on the plane back home to good old Blighty.
Move into the area of the village of Monaghan itself. And the first house on the north side of the road coming out of town is the Johnson family that you know. Okay.
Well, we'll get out in the afternoon, then we go out in the evening, we get briefed, well briefed, but most of the time you're listening to Floyd, Pink Floyd was, and music was very important to us, to keep us going. But we'd be lying about, or we'd be out sweeping the bloody place just for something to stop us getting bored. And then you prepare yourself for going out, you would get briefed. And stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, where we were going to go, what other bricks were going out with us, and everything was planned to great detail.
You go into the operations room and you get a briefing from the battalion photographer. He worked in the Incel. And he'd tell you, what's happened. In there, you'd have the map of the area, you'd have all the players, the IRA players who we need to keep an eye out for. Certain incidents have happened. This needs to be this area we need to concentrate on. So it was always that. So we would have, we'd go in the ops room for a briefing, and then we'd have the debrief afterwards. So yeah, that was an important factor. Yeah.
Greenfinches went out on a patrol and we'd have searched the females, searched their handbags and that. And in later time, I would have went out on patrol with the British soldiers and we'd have went on house searches. And we'd have went early in the morning and we'd have went in and I would have searched the mothers and the babies, and stuff like that. They were sometimes very hostile. I mean, if somebody was coming banging on your door at 6 o'clock in the morning, you'd be very hostile too.
Looking back, we were just information gatherers. As we went out in the street, we had to know everybody that was regarded as a player. People with connections with the INLA or the IRA, and their rank, their age, their name, their address. And when you go in after your 2-hour patrol, you get debriefed. Who did you see, what they were doing, who were they talking to? So all this information coming from all these boots on the ground would be getting fed to the hierarchy. They would monitor what the Republicans were doing.
Serial 10's just come out of his house. I seen him the other day, and he had long hair. Just seen him again, and he's had it cut. He's heading through Brew Park.
Yeah, okay, what was he wearing?
He's wearing a light-coloured denim jacket, blue jeans, and he's carrying a brown duffel bag.
The army was always under pressure to generate enough soldiers, and therefore the part-time UDR and RAR were an important supplement. And thinking regular soldiers who understood that actually had huge respect, and quite rightly had huge respect for what the part-timers were doing. And they played an important role. They were an important part of making sure, to use a hackneyed expression, we had enough boots on the ground.
OK, we're a homegrown force, but we always thought we'd join to serve our country and our Queen, regardless, you know, that we were in Northern Ireland. Well, you never told anybody you're in the UDR. You always said, somebody said, what do you work at? You said, I'm in the civil service, even though they probably knew.
I suppose that's the uniqueness of being a part-time soldier. You lived at home, and you held down a civilian job. The terrorists probably viewed the part-time member of the security forces as the vulnerable, whereas a soldier, they were able to go into their buildings under 3, 4, 6 foot concrete bomb-proof accommodation, whereas a part-time officer, part-time soldier had to go home. And I suppose in many ways we felt very, very vulnerable. But the common enemy was the Republican movement.
One had to have huge respect for the fact that they lived amongst the community in farmhouses in South Armagh or in back streets in Belfast or whatever, but were willing to come into their company bases, take their civilian clothes off, put their uniform on, go out and patrol in the time they had available, and then when their patrolling period was over, go back in their civilian cars and go home again, and exposing themselves to really quite a lot of personal risk.
The safest place a part-time soldier in the Ulster Defence Regiment could be was out on patrol. That was when he was at his safest. The soldier coming from mainland, he came over, he probably felt that he was at his most vulnerable when he was out on patrol. We were at our most vulnerable when we were going about our daily task, our daily round of work or whatever it was, because we set a pattern. Well, most people set a pattern at their work. If you were a postman, a milkman, a farmer, whatever it was, you had a daily or a weekly routine, and that routine could be identified, and the terrorists could make use of that, and that's how we were at our most vulnerable.
You were very vigilant. You closed the curtains before you lit your light, and you never hung your uniform out in the line, and you checked your car religiously. There was establishments out of bounds, like pubs out of bounds, stuff you never went to, because you knew you were going to set yourself up as a target. Or you'd been hyper-vigilant. You'd have never really switched off. You'd have been always very wary. If you'd seen a strange car, you'd been phoned into the ops room to get it checked out. You were an easy target. You know, people say, oh, you were in a war. To me, it was no war. If somebody comes up and shoots you in the back of the head, how can that be a war? To me, that's cold-blooded murder.
Your view of the conflict is extremely narrow. All you're bothered about is what directly impacts on you. So it is lonely, and you are cut off from the civilian population. You never meet the civilian population outside of your uniform. So you are cut off from them in that sense, and it does feel lonely in that sense, but you also want that kind of disconnect, so you're completely focused on your little world around you. But I'd already arrived at the conclusion that every member of the nationalist community was my enemy. So I didn't really make the distinction between IRA and non-IRA. I just saw the whole civilian community, who I equated with being nationalists, as my enemy. I didn't make a distinction.
Sometimes it would be really tedious and really boring, you know, a lot of time to sort of think, why am I here? What is this, what it's all about? And then there'd be moments of incredibly intense periods, where it'd get full on.
I mean, during these tours, it wasn't that I was deprived of sleep. I was deprived more of good sleep. It would be an hour here, an hour there, 2 hours here, 2 hours there. And that has a really weary, tiring, stressful effect on you. And it's not long before you start hating the place. And it's not long before you get in this kind of weariness where you may do things that you probably wouldn't do under normal conditions. You know, that kind of tension, that stress, just wanting it to burst out.
It kind of got a bit frustrating, really, because it was, you know, the sleep deprivation, just basically being on tenterhooks all the time, hypervigilance, you know, waiting for something terrible to happen, because obviously, as I progressed through my military service, I realised just how hated the parachute regiment were in Northern Ireland.
We all have our views on Bloody Sunday. I don't think that the Powers were the right regiment to be sent in at that time. This was the early start of the Troubles. They were a tough regiment that were sent in there to crack a nut, and that's what they did. I don't believe they had the same Northern Ireland training as what we had. They certainly added numbers to the IRA recruitment drive anyway, and I can understand why, but certainly it was a sad day.
We were warned on numerous occasions, the last thing we need is another Bloody Sunday. So we were taught actually restraint, not to antagonise. You could only open fire if you were under direct fire. You couldn't shoot petrol bombers or rioters, and rightly so. You could fire baton rounds at them. Basically, it was restraint. We were restrained from opening up because, again, they emphasised we don't need another Bloody Sunday. That was hammered into us. You kind of become, you're 21 years old. We're all in our early 20s, most of us. You adopt a kind of gung-ho attitude, you know, of togetherness, that brick, that unit. That's all that you're concerned with is your own safety and the safety of your muckers. You watch my back, I'll watch yours. So there was definitely a camaraderie there that one gets when young guys under pressure or in danger. They bond together.
It's now 3.5 hours since the double bomb explosion which killed the soldiers. The army still can't allow anyone within half a mile of the scene for their own safety. The police who've been to the scene say they have never seen such carnage in all the Troubles in Northern Ireland.
We were flown out to put in the accordion immediately after the explosion. The IRA were very, very clever, because after the first explosion, they knew where the instant control point would be, which was in the gate lodge. And that's where they had the second explosion. So after that, we were told if an explosion went off, have your instant control point in the crater of the original explosion, because you know that area is clear.
The reinforcements, thinking the worst was over, parked here, the very spot where the second booby trap of a quarter-ton of explosive had been prepared. The relief forces were taken by surprise, the ambush was complete, and a further 12 soldiers died, including the local army commander.
It was a sight to be seen. It's one of those things you'll never, ever forget. And it brought home the reality of the job of what we were doing. Soldiering wasn't just signing up and seeing the world. This was real life.
Well, the first tour, everything seemed temporary. in 76. So there was a feeling that this was going to be over very quickly. When I came back in 80, I couldn't believe the change that had happened at Crossmaglen and Fort Kill. There was now a full concrete barracks up there. The impression was, we're in for the long haul here. You don't build this and just abandon it. This is a fortress now. From what was just a reinforced RUC station, this is now a fortress. And that was quite, you know, startling. There was just a feeling that this was going to be in for the long haul. This wasn't going to go away overnight.
The situation became so bad in Armagh that the army decided to build dozens of concrete barriers like this at the border. But it seemed that no sooner had they erected them than someone came along and demolished them. In fact, this is the only surviving one. So once again, the border was open. And an open border is almost like a gift to a terrorist. And with Crossmaglen only a quick 2-minute drive away, it's not surprising it became the focal point for much of the terrorists' activity in South Armagh.
There was a campaign to make sure that unapproved roads remained closed, so the Royal Engineers would dig up the roads or sometimes use explosives to create craters in the roads, so that all traffic coming from the south would be filtered in such a way that they had to come through your checkpoint.
We were forever going and putting like these barricades up, and they could be steel constructions, they could be things like oil barrels full of concrete that we'd put into place and then weld them down and try and close these country roads off. We'd go out, do these things, go and check them the next day and they'd be gone. You know, somebody put a tractor through it or something like that. And then you got the idea, well, hold on, we better be a bit careful here because some of these might be booby-trapped. And then the mere act of checking these things and redoing them became a very slow process of the search, the approach, and that would tie up a lot of time just trying to keep these roads closed. They were very good at it. South Armagh people were very good at tying us up.
Operating in South Armagh, you were operating right up to the border. So just the other side of that hedge, or the other side of that road, was the Republic. And their security forces would often be operating just on their side. And for a long time, there was a policy that we didn't talk to the Southern Irish security forces. And often was the occasion when we'd have a conversation with the bush. There'd be a Southern Irish policeman or soldier sort of in the bush, and we'd talk to him, but we were all denying that we were talking to him. We wanted information from him, he wanted information from us. Now, as the peace process developed, those links became rather more common and rather more usual. But in the early days, pragmatically on the ground, you wanted to talk to the Gardaí chap because you want to know what was going on. Provided he was prepared to talk to us, we couldn't be seen talking to each other, so bushies had conversations.
Do you expect any opposition from the Irish Army?
Oh no, certainly not. We are on our side of the border. We're in the United Kingdom and they are in the Republic. And there we are. I mean, you can see them down the road here, where they're well back from the border. No question of any confrontation of any kind. They're watching same way as we're watching here.
The Crossmaglen base was like a fortified RUC station. There was what went on in the house with the police, the RUC, and then the kind of army around it. In a way, never the twain met. We weren't privy to what the RUC were doing until we went out and we escorted them, obviously as their kind of armed guard. So really, in lots of ways, I went out, but never really knew why we were going out, other than, you know, we're escorting the RUC. We could get to a property, they'd go in, and maybe our officer would go in, something like that, while we kind of secured the outside. But what happened inside in the first tour, I hadn't got a clue. Obviously, they needed to question somebody or search the place or find out what was going on. But we were never told. It was a kind of need-to-know basis.
The army are here to enable the police to do their job. Policemen have been hounded out of town and are flown in each day to their office inside the compound. They never venture out unless escorted.
We were just the kind of reinforcement of the police, aren't we? You know, I mean, sometimes it used to be quite frustrating. We'd be like on QRF, you know, quick reaction force on top cover in the Land Rovers, and we'd go out in the sleet and snow at night for the IUC just to go to Chinese restaurant and get a takeaway, you know, and we'd be like, obviously having none of that. And generally, they just had a better life than we had. We did feel a little bit kind of like, well, you know, we're the ones that are freezing the knackers off, stood in the back of this Land Rover, and, you know, they never had to do anything like that. And, you know, after a time, you start to resent that.
The trouble came as the street campaign in support of Bobby Sands is being stepped up right across the province. This afternoon, the mother and sister of Bobby Sands visited him in prison, where he's on the 46th day of his hunger strike. They said they were told by a doctor that Mr. Sands has days rather than weeks to live.
Bobby Sands was coming towards the end. It's still got some time to go, and we were told that this tour could actually be extended. We might have to stay here, because they were expecting the place to go up big time. So they wanted everybody on the ground. And I remember thinking, oh, crikey, I hope they don't extend it. I just want to get out of here, because it's like, we ain't achieving anything. In fact, if anything, this is getting worse. If we've been here all these years and it's going to go up big time because this guy's starving himself to death, then why are we here? What are we achieving? So it became like there was a kind of Northern Ireland weariness. I just wanted to get out of the place.
The streets were awash with British troops. Thousands of them came, so we were all sort of cramped conditions, lived in Gurwood Park and little things called Z-beds. We'd be patrolling several times a day. Very cramped conditions. Tempers were, so yeah, I'd seen good friends cocking weapons at each other, you know, just with the pure tension and living on top of each other. We were at breaking point at times. The initial reaction to a prisoner dying, the bin lids would bang on the streets and the black flags would come out the windows. But it's amazing how quickly you become immune to it. After about the fourth or fifth guy dying, it was like, oh, another one, you know. We weren't as emotionally attached as the Republican community, obviously. We kind of detached ourselves from what was actually going on. We just wanted to get through it.
After some hours, the army took in 2 armoured vehicles. To shrieks of delight from the bombers, the soldier who was leading his men up the street sustained a direct hit.
At the time, it was us against them. And I just get to December, I'm away from here, I'm done, I'm finished, I'm off to Hong Kong for 2 years and I never want to see this fucking place again.
Do you enjoy this sort of soldiering?
Serious? No. Anybody likes risking their life must be balmy. No. I don't like it one bit. But you gotta do it. That's what we're paid for, and we gotta do it.
One time I was in Rosemount. I was on stag there in the Sangha, looking down the alley. You know, you're up there for 2 hours at a time, so you like that. Yeah. And I just saw 2 lads coming down the alley, which wasn't uncommon. I thought they were lighting a cigarette at the time, so I was just sat there watching. Anyway, no, it was a petrol bomb, went up, smashed on the rocket mast, came straight through the window onto me. Yeah, I managed to get my head down, so it was all over my helmet, it was all down my arms. Anyway, we had a tannoy. Yeah, an emergency tannoy there, and that was it. I hit the button. I said, "I'm on fire, I'm on fire." So, yeah, guard commander said, "Well, put it out then." I said, "I'm on fire." And that was it. Fire extinguisher. Managed to get it out. Ended up in Mulgrave Park Hospital in Belfast. Yeah, for a couple of weeks, high on morphine, counting bricks. It still impacts me today. I didn't recognise it, but my family did. Yeah, they said I went one there, one person, come back a completely different person. Yeah, after 3 years over there. Yeah, I was a different personality. And I couldn't sleep for a while. Yeah. My girlfriend at the time, well, kid's mum, it was, I used to beat her up in the middle of the night, pull her hair, smack her in the face. Yeah, but that never happened before Ireland, but it did for a good few years afterwards. Dreams of Ireland, well, not of what happened, but what was happening in the dreams. And of course, I was defending myself in my dreams by the looks of things. Yeah.
There was no what you would get now, like some sort of psychologist saying how to deal with your feelings. There was none of that. And to be quite honest, we weren't even looking for anything like that, because if you felt you needed psychological support, it was seen as a sign of weakness. You're supposed to just rock up and rock on. But when you're that age, you don't give a damn. You think you're bulletproof. So we get no debriefing at all, no aftercare, none of it. You just got to soldier on.
Because you train on this whole thing of masking your emotions, masking, you know, what's really going on, you know, by putting this front. So the drinking thing was always encouraged. It's like, you know, if you couldn't handle your drink, you know, you weren't a paratrooper. Because I worked in the sergeant's mess as well. I mean, I used to drink in there, you know, and what else are you going to do when you're like listening to all these sub-stories of divorces and breakups and all this horrible stuff that happened, you know, way down south in the Falklands.
Funny enough, back at Castle Dillard, there was a bar there on camp. They used to run a Saturday night disco, and some of the local girls were buzzed in. So there was all this kind of stuff, if you like, that you'd be doing at the local club back home. Bit of dancing, drinking, making a fool of yourself, what teenagers and young guys do on a Saturday night. That was probably as near as you got to letting off steam.
Pig's Disco, that was the crude name they gave it for the disco every Sunday. You know, and you used to see like the kind of local girls turn up who'd obviously been vetted. And I remember being on guard duty on the gate at Palace and did a little minibus, and you know, some of them they've got the nice best clothing and stuff, and I'm just thinking, what are you letting yourselves in for?
The regular soldier at that stage came over and did his tour. He lived in the barracks. He went out on his patrol. That was the only time he ever saw the outside world. In the early days, they used to socialise in Enniskillen, but they were targeted once or twice, and that all stopped. So their social life was totally inside the barracks. They only ever got out when they were on patrol. But within the Ulster Defence Regiment, we very quickly established our own social life. You know, the people socialised together in the barracks. They organised their own functions, and that was very much how it went on. And you formed very much a group of social friends. I went out a couple of times, but I was never comfortable with it. Obviously, being loyalist areas, but I would prefer to stay in barracks. I didn't feel safe. You just get pissed, you know. As soon as work was done for the day, you get dressed, you go out, you go down in Affy, and you get leathered. There was quite a wee bit of dope getting smoked as well. You know, we'd bring hash back with us. But we only ever smoked it in Aldergrove. If we were down in the city, the last thing you want to be doing is patrolling the Ardoyne, stoned out your nut, because you're not on your toes.
The kind of motto in there was work hard, play harder. You know, the crime is getting caught. So, you know, a few people said, well, you know, what did the officers think? Well, the officers didn't know. Say, for instance, when I took psychedelic drugs for the first time in the Christmas disco in Palace Barracks. You know, I wasn't going to go. I think the platoon sergeant said, "No, you're behaving a bit weird, Griffiths. You've been on the wacky back here." I said, "No, obviously no, Sergeant." You know, I wasn't going to turn around and go, "No, I'm actually soaring on this Pink Floyd acid that someone gave me." You know.
Good afternoon. The IRA's ceasefire announcement hailing a historic crossroads was made shortly after 11 o'clock this morning. Their military operations will cease at midnight. A new opportunity to secure a just and lasting settlement, they say, has been created.
All the talk to us was that you don't let your guard down. There might be a ceasefire in place, but you carry on before you don't let your guard down, and that's what made me think that, yeah, it's a come on. The IRA had just taken a break for a few weeks. And then shortly after that, they made the decision that that soldiers the next day, once the ceasefire was in place, wouldn't patrol with helmets on anymore. They would put their soft berets on and patrol out of the base with berets. And that struck me. I was worried about that. And then suddenly they're saying you're going to go out the front doors and patrol into Newry, into the Derry Begs, or for the lads in Belfast, into Belfast. With no hard hat on at all, you suddenly got your Barry on, and that was... I remember that playing on my mind.
Nothing changed for us, because remember, it's a ceasefire. We say, yeah. I haven't taken it as a ceasefire. I'm still going to be on my toes, and we were. But we were told, it was a plan. They had this plan to send us out less aggressively with our berets and no weapons. Yeah, and that was it. My alarm bells were ringing then. To send us out on the streets with berets and no weapons, we were just like, oh, no, this is going to go horribly wrong. All it takes is one. All it takes is one. He knows we can't fire back. That was just handing us to them on a plate, that was. It never happened eventually, because somebody obviously turned around and said, right, no, because if it goes off, what are we going to defend ourselves with? Because we didn't have no weapons. No weapons in Berry, just basically bimbling through the streets.
At this early stage, no one would dare predict that this is the end of the IRA. It is, however, the beginning of a significantly new situation, and many will hope that it's the first step towards achieving a better future.
"12 days ago, Lance Bombardier Stephen Restrick was shot dead by a sniper at an army checkpoint in Bestbrook, South Armagh. Parents John and Rita Restrick had decided against a military funeral. As the ceremony began, a letter from them was on its way to the Prime Minister, pleading for talks between all sides and for an IRA ceasefire. They said some good must be made to come of their son's death. And they urged the Prime Minister to do his best to ensure that Stephen's death would be the last.
Soldiers are shot dead in Belfast.
The shot at Valley Kelly, 16 dead, 70 injured. The soldiers thought it was a safe place for them.
This slaughter of innocent people is the product of evil and depraved minds.
The army in Northern Ireland has begun dismantling its observation post.
What happened on Bloody Sunday was both unjustified and unjustifiable.
What did I do that was good? Pushing people at gunpoint against a wall and searching them where they were going to work? Kicking people's front doors in? What was that all about? That's not democracy. I have absolutely no idea what we achieved, if anything, apart from divide and cause animosity. There must have been a better way of dealing with this situation. Typical Britain, sledgehammer tactics, let's smash them, as is done all over the world. And the situation could have been solved in the 60s and 70s, but they let it drag on.
If you are on the streets in a little minute's time, you'll be liable to...
Was it a success? Was it not a success? The answer is, look at Northern Ireland today. It was a success, and it is a success, and the people of Northern Ireland have got the chance of living a decent life in a much more secure set of surroundings than they were in the late 60s and early 1970s. So, a success, undoubtedly. Quite clearly, the grand strategic objective was to keep Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom.
Sometimes the army got it hugely right, and sometimes they got it hugely wrong. You know, we're all on a journey. And it's how we travel in that journey and the knowledge that we secure, and how we then put that knowledge that has been learned into positive action and constructive action. And that's what I take away from my service in the Army, and specifically within Northern Ireland during Operation Banner.
We were probably unique that we were actually working and living in the province. and staying here, and we weren't turning over and going away in 6 months' time, that we were always here. But no, and I was proud to have served in the EDR, and I don't regret it.
I look back and I always find it amazing that a conflict, that the deployment of troops starts in '69, and I was still, young men like me were still being deployed in 1992, 1994, and of course all the way into the early 2000s. I'm torn between what we actually achieved or didn't achieve. I just think that the conflict could have been avoided in its entirety.
In a way, if I look back as an older man, we held the line. We held the peace. As it wasn't perfect, people did die, atrocious things happened, both parties, all sides. But how bad would it have been if we hadn't been here? So I guess from that point of view, I can look at it with a certain degree of pride that I don't know, there may be people walking around today that if I hadn't have gone that way, they would have been dead.